You're listening to Major Gazer. I'm your host, Callie Cross. Tonight we're looking at NASA's protocols for the critical hours after humanity makes contact with extraterrestrial intelligence. There is a document. It was first adopted several decades ago. It is publicly available. And it is the closest thing humanity has to a plan for what happens if we detect extraterrestrial intelligence. It runs to a few pages. It has no legal force, and it contains no answer to the most obvious question it raises. That document is the International Academy of Astronautics SETI Post-Detection Protocol, formally titled The Declaration of Principles Concerning Activities Following the Detection of Extraterrestrial Intelligence. Step 1. Verify the signal independently. Step 2. Notify the IAA SETI Committee, the International Astronomical Union, and the Secretary-General of the United Nations. Step 3. Do not respond on behalf of Earth without international consultation. That is the plan. That is, in a meaningful sense, all of it. What I want to walk through today is what the protocol actually says, what it doesn't say, and what that gap reveals about something I find genuinely worth sitting with. Not whether we detect a signal, but whether we have any coherent answer to what happens next. The first thing to understand is what voluntary actually means in this context. Jill Tarter, who spent decades as the director of SETI research at the SETI Institute and is one of the primary architects of the modern search framework, has described the post-detection protocol as a gentleman's agreement. Her framing is precise. It is honored only by those who choose to honor it. There is no mechanism to compel compliance. A researcher at a private institution, a commercial telescope operator, a graduate student who happens to be monitoring the right frequency at the right moment, none of them are legally bound by anything in that document. They would be asked, politely, to follow a framework. That is the full extent of the obligation. This matters more now than it did when the protocol was written. The Allen Telescope Array, operated by the SETI Institute in California, has internal escalation procedures for anomalous signals. But the number of instruments capable of radio astronomy has grown, and the proportion of those instruments operating under institutional frameworks that have even heard of the IAA protocol has not kept pace. The protocol was conceived in an environment where a handful of large radio observatories were doing SETI work. That environment no longer exists. And then there is the matter of the UN's role, which is where things get interesting, in a way that should probably concern us more than it does. The UN Office for Outer Space Affairs, UNOOSA, based in Vienna, is the body nominally positioned to coordinate an international governmental response to, among other things, the IAA protocol's notification requirement. Here is what UNOOSA's mandate actually covers: outer space treaties, the registration of space objects, capacity building for spacefaring nations. It has no first contact specific mandate, no standing emergency procedure. When the IAA protocol says notify the UN Secretary General, it is notifying an office that has no documented obligation to convene, no defined response chain, and no special authority to act. For a period, media coverage repeated as near established fact that the UN had appointed a designated alien ambassador, specifically naming Mazlan Othman, who was then head of UNOOSA. Othman and the UN both explicitly denied this. No such appointment existed. The story circulated anyway, for years, because it was a cleaner version of the world, one where someone was in charge. Here is the thing about Oumuamua that I keep coming back to. In the autumn of a recent decade, astronomers identified the first confirmed interstellar object to pass through our solar system. They named it Oumuamua. It was traveling on a hyperbolic trajectory, meaning it had come from outside the solar system and was leaving it permanently. And here is the part that does not get enough attention. It had already passed its closest approach to the sun before anyone realized what it was. The identification happened after the fact. No alert protocol was triggered. It was classified as an astronomical object, which of course it was. But its behavior was anomalous in ways that generated serious, peer-reviewed debate. Its acceleration as it departed did not match what solar radiation pressure alone should have produced. Multiple papers were published. Harvard astronomer Avi Loeb argued publicly that an artificial origin could not be ruled out. That remains a minority scientific position, and the honest answer is that the cause of the anomalous acceleration is genuinely unresolved. But what strikes me is this. Even if something extraordinary had been confirmed, the IAA protocol covers radio signal detection, not an artifact transiting the solar system, not biological material in a returned sample, not a physical object behaving in ways that resist conventional explanation. The protocol's scope is narrow, and that narrowness is a real gap. The Voyager Golden Records are worth mentioning here because they represent the only time humanity has deliberately sent a curated message into interstellar space. Carl Sagan directed that project. The records contain greetings in dozens of languages, music, images, a map. They were launched without an international vote. The decision about what to say on behalf of Earth was made by a relatively small group of people in a short window of time under NASA's direction. That is the one documented case of humanity speaking to the cosmos. And it happened because someone had the institutional access and the initiative to make it happen, not because any consensus mechanism existed. David Brin, the astrophysicist and science fiction writer who has been among the most vocal critics of active METI, has argued precisely this: that before anyone transmits on behalf of Earth, there should be an international authorization mechanism. No such mechanism exists. A private company that wanted to broadcast a signal toward a nearby star system could do so today with no legal barrier. Liu Cixin's three-body problem series takes this seriously in its own way. The dark forest hypothesis, which I will not fully spoil, is essentially the argument that broadcasting your existence is something civilizations do at most once. Brin has made a structurally similar case in peer-reviewed terms. I am not saying the dark forest is correct. I am saying that the debate about whether to transmit and who gets to decide is a real scientific and policy argument, not a science fiction premise. And we have no answer to it. The 72-hour window that appears in journalistic coverage of first contact scenarios, by the way, is not in any official document. No protocol specifies a timeline between detection and notification. The IAA protocol defines no response window at all. That framing comes from speculative writing. It reads like procedure. It is not. What the actual documents reveal, taken together, is a specific kind of gap. Not the absence of thought. Serious researchers have spent decades building frameworks, writing protocols, running the argument forward. Jill Tarter's career is evidence of that. The IAA protocol is evidence of that. But the gap between the protocol's intent and its enforceability is, in Tarter's own framing, total. And the questions the protocol leaves unanswered are not minor edge cases. Who has legal authority to reply on behalf of Earth? The protocol defers to appropriate international institutions without naming them. What counts as contact? A radio signal, a physical artifact, and a direct appearance each involve completely different chains of events, and current frameworks address only the radio signal case with any specificity. Would the information stay contained long enough for any official process to operate? The protocol was written before real-time global information distribution existed. A single colleague, a leaked document, a telescope operator posting to a forum, any of these could outpace the notification chain the protocol describes. The WOW signal was detected at Ohio State University's Big Ear telescope decades ago. A researcher circled the printout and wrote "WOW" in the margin. It was never repeated. it was never explained. It remains the strongest candidate signal ever detected in the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, and it is unverified. If something like it were detected tomorrow, Step 1 of the IAA protocol would be independent confirmation. That could take days, weeks, or, in the case of the WOW signal itself, apparently indefinitely. What I find most worth sitting with is not the missing plan exactly. It is what the missing plan tells us about the question itself. We have spent decades building the instruments to listen. We have thought seriously about what we might hear. The document that would govern the response to the most significant discovery in human history is a voluntary professional agreement that a private actor can ignore with no legal consequence, administered by a UN office with no first contact mandate, with no defined timeline, no named authority, and no answer to who speaks for Earth. That is not a failure of imagination. The researchers who built this framework understood its limits. Tarter has said so plainly. It is the honest shape of a problem that turns out to be harder than it looks, which is, before you can have a plan for what to say back, you have to agree on who gets to decide. And it turns out, that is one of the oldest and least resolved questions in human civilization, now pointed at the sky. That's Major Gazer. Thanks for spending some time under the sky with me. See you out there.
Grab news. Thomas.